Chris, how are you, sir?
I'm pretty good. Busy time.
Yeah, busy time and cold.
Very cold. I'm biking into City Hall every day, and I'm freezing when I get to room 9.
Yeah. Chris, this busy weekend. A lot happening. I'm just going to say names, and I want you to just, give me a sort of synopsis. Ingrid Lewis-Martin.
Indictment, just a few days ago, alongside her son, which I think shocked a lot of people, but had also been a long time coming. A lot of people have been speculating about wrongdoing involving her. And when this came out, I was hearing from a lot of sources who were basically saying, this is what we've always heard she's been involved in. Now, you know how it works. There are political rumor mills. So of course people will say that, and people will say that with a certain agenda. But the reason that I'm even mentioning it was because I was hearing it from so many different sources, from so many different camps. So I think there's long been this suspicion that there's been something allegedly rotten there. And we saw that on Friday.
Jeff Madry.
I don't even know where to start with that. The allegations are disgusting. I mean, just shocking. You're talking about the most powerful uniformed official in the police department violating every single piece of public trust almost. He's taking overtime pay, which the police department has had a problem with for so long, right? Keeping a cap on it. And he's using it in order to extract sexual favors from a subordinate. He denies it, and I will stress that. His attorney says that this is not true, but it's so shocking on so many different levels. Sexual harassment, sexual assault is, of course, awful in its own right, but the fact that overtime pay in the police department, which has so long been a problem for the city, has a role in all of this, it just makes it sleazy and problematic on a whole other level.
It's just a lot of personnel changes, obviously, due to this. Do you think this is the tip of the iceberg? What are you hearing?
In terms of the police department? Yeah. We're seeing Commissioner Tisch, since she came in and took over the reins at the police department, making a lot of personnel changes. In conjunction with the news that broke about Jeff Madry, you had her oust the internal affairs chief as well, the guy who's supposed to be investigating wrongdoing within the department. So I do think we're going to continue to see a lot of personnel changes. We still have chiefs in there that, how should I put it, who have been very loyal to Eric Adams, where there's been allegations of ethical improprieties. And there's still a lot of those in the department, and we're going to have to wait and see if Jessica Tisch is going to do anything about them as well.
The other piece, or the other story that's out, is the $10 million in matching funds in the campaign finance board. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that? And do you think, based on them not starting or giving him the first round, that there's a probable chance that he may not, or may have to return, better said?
I think that's the biggest threat. Absolutely, it's significant that he didn't get the first payment. But, so let's just rewind a little bit. CFB, right, decided we're not going to give you the first round of payments. That doesn't mean that he can't apply in a month. That doesn't mean that he can't apply further down the cycle. Is it likely that CFB is all of a sudden going to change his mind and give him matching funds while it's under indictment? No. But Eric Adams has a lot of money. He's sitting on, $3 million already. And if he opts out of the matching funds program, he can start raising a lot more money at a higher level. So he could feasibly run a campaign just with private funds. The problem is what you just talked about, which the CFB hinted in a letter that I and Greg Smith from the city first reported on. They're saying that they might find him in something called breach of certificate. If they do that, and this is due to the allegations in his indictment, if they find him in breach, they will likely make him return all the $10 million in public matching funds that he got during the 2021 campaign. That would be very difficult for Eric Adams, because then all of a sudden he's, so he has $3 million in the bank, right? he's $7 million in the hole. So he would need to raise a ton of money just to pay off his debt and then try to run a re-election campaign while sitting in that much debt. That would be very difficult.
When does something like that, when does that decision come? When does the CFP make that decision?
They are supposed to make it as part of their audit of his 2021 campaign operations. They haven't given out a timeline, but if you're looking at what has happened in the past few weeks, right, the CFB turned over what they call their draft audit. The campaign responded to that. Now the CFB is in the last leg of the process, which is assessing fines, assessing the final decision of what sort of penalties they're going to mete out.
Chris, what does it mean, like a big picture? What is potential Trump pardon, right? Trial, what does it mean, big picture, for the mayor's re-election prospects?
With the matching funds,
all of it. All of it.
Like you said, there's so many different possibilities on the horizon, right? And I don't think Eric Adams had made it a secret that he's trying to, get into Trump's good graces. There's been a lot of speculation as to whether Eric Adams is going to run for re-election because of that. Nothing substantive that, is saying that he's not going to run for re-election, and the mayor says that he's going to run. But it makes you wonder, right, when you have the Democratic mayor of New York City trying to get into good graces of Donald Trump, a pretty reviled figure in New York, at least since he was elected president in 2016. I think big picture, this is going to become a huge part of Eric Adams' legacy. When all is said and done, when Eric Adams is not mayor anymore, whether he wins the second term or not, his criminal indictment, the way that he tried to ally himself with Donald Trump, that's going to be a big part of the Eric Adams legacy.
Chris, what do you make of the other mayoral candidates and their prospects?
I will reiterate, Eric Adams absolutely has a good shot at winning re-election. I don't think anyone should rule him out.
I agree.
Even though, there's political vulnerabilities, obviously, being under indictment, saying what he's saying about Trump in a deep blue city like New York, but he still has a strong base. And the other candidates, while, some of them have momentum in terms of fundraising, they don't have a lot of name recognition. They're not very strong on a citywide basis. But I guess front runners at the moment in the challenger field, of course there's Brad Lander. He's a citywide elected, so that's something. Soran Mamdani, you're seeing him generate a lot of support among young voters. There's a question of, will that be enough in a citywide race that's determined by, a lot of union endorsement and union turnout? Maybe not. It's going to be an uphill battle for him. But I think absolutely Brad, Scott Stringer, who has some name recognition, and then, of course, the name we're all waiting to see if it's going to happen, Andrew Cuomo.
Do you think he does it?
I'm starting to become more and more skeptical of it, but I don't want to rule him out completely.
Why? What's creating this skepticism?
In a way, I think if he were to run, right, we would have seen something by now. It's almost 2025. Sure, he's been floating his name out there, but we haven't seen the type of meaningful steps that you would maybe
residency is a big step.
It is a big step, but it's not like he's taking the official steps of forming committees to start actually raising funds. And sure, he has a lot of name recognition. He could probably pull in a fair amount of money pretty quickly, but I think in a lot of ways, his eye is on 2026. He wants to become governor again. That's the job that he loved, the job that he's always seen as the top prize. It's almost like becoming mayor is like a demotion. I don't think he ultimately wants that one. He wants to stay relevant, and teasing a mayoral run might be the way to do that.
Chris, why do you think there's so much people feel that it's okay to sort of take shots at the governor? What has created that lane, right? Think about it. Incumbency is a very powerful tool, right? And unlike the mayor, there isn't any right? All this noise surrounding the mayor that creates a space for all these people to say, hey, I want to throw my hat in the ring. And the governor is the total opposite, probably arguably the most scandal-free governor or citywide, statewide in a long time.
Sure.
So why the vulnerability? What do you attribute that to?
I think it's interesting that you say scandal-free. I feel like what Kathy Hochul has done very well is laying low. She hasn't stirred a lot of controversy, and she's kind of tried to be middle of the road, friendly Kathy from Buffalo. And she's not taking a lot of controversial stances. She's not affecting a lot of big policy changes, period. And while that might be helpful for her, personality of not being very controversial, that also opens up to the attacks that you talked about. So, you have Richie Torres out there and saying, she's ineffective. She's the Joe Biden of New York. She's the type of governor who doesn't have the kind of the strength to carry out these more substantive changes on a statewide level. And I think that's something she's grappled with since she took over after Cuomo resigned, because you contrast that with how Cuomo behaved in office, right? He relished a fight. He loved going up in intense policy battles and feuding with the legislature. You don't have that with Kathy Hochul.
Chris, do you think it's too early for potential candidates or opponents to come after the governor, considering it's about 2 years out? Doesn't that create a potential vulnerability for Richie or Delgado, right? That's a bold move, right? When you're the lieutenant governor this early to be sort of publicly furling, because there's a why, right? Stories are being written.
Yeah, I guess there's absolutely vulnerability, but then also I think Delgado and Torres, they're doing this just to kind of tease it out there. We're not going to see any campaign announcements anytime soon. And, Richie Torres told me this in City Hall Park the other week when he was holding one of his anti-Hochul press conferences there. I asked him for a timeline. What are we talking about here? And it's I'm not making any decisions before mid-2025. So, we're going to see the mayoral primary play out, and then I think the gubernatorial race.
But that also creates an opportunity for someone to prepare.
Sure.
Right?
No, absolutely.
It's harder to be caught by surprise if someone's out there making noise, right?
Yeah, and I guess I don't know how Richie Torres and Antonio Delgado are maybe weighing that. You're right. Hochul can right now be staffing up in a different way or developing campaign strategies that maybe she otherwise wouldn't, because she's preparing for Torres to run against her.
What about the comptroller's race? You paying attention? Anything standing out there, or it's so noisy in the mayoral race, and right, and it's taking all the oxygen. It's really no one's really paying attention.
I don't think, and maybe because of how much noise there is around the mayoral primary, I don't think there's a lot of public attention on it. But at the same time, it's going to be a competitive race. You have Jennifer Rajkumar showed that she could raise a lot of money, and at the same time, you have city council veterans like Mark Levine and Justin Brannon. They know how to run campaigns. So it's gonna be a competitive race without a doubt. And honestly, not that I'm saying that I'm sitting on a scoop here, but is there the possibility that Brad Lander flip-flops and decides that, I'm just going to run for comptroller again? Maybe. And
why?
To go back to my previous point, Eric Adams still has a pretty good chance at re-election, and maybe Brad at some point decides, maybe I don't have a serious shot, and he wants to stay a citywide elected official and runs for comptroller.
What do you think Jumaane does?
It's a good question. I think the only way Jumaane Williams runs for mayor is if Eric Adams resigns. If he takes over as interim mayor, then he runs for mayor. But I don't foresee Jumaane trying to step into any sort of mayoral primary running against Eric Adams. I just don't.
What does this political climate mean for these two people? What is your take?
for Jumaane Williams?
No. This political climate, what does it mean for Attorney General Tish James and Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg?
For Alvin Bragg, I think we saw with the indictment of Ingrid Lewis-Martin that he will continue to try to prosecute corruption in city government. Regardless of what happens with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, he's going to continue to go over corruption in municipal government. We don't know if he's doing that as a strategic decision. With, Trump coming into office, there's been a lot of talk about Southern District being completely reformed, right? Under Damian Williams, that office has been very, very aggressive on city government corruption. Under Trump, maybe it won't, because that will be an entirely new regime that comes in that maybe will not be as aggressive on corruption, especially with Trump and Eric Adams having kind of a buddy-buddy relationship. With Tish, she's of course also been floated as a potential mayoral contender. She hasn't really publicly entertained it, but Tish James and Andrew Cuomo are sworn enemies. If Cuomo jumps in, I could absolutely see a world in which Tish James goes in, and then all of a sudden you have the two of them running against each other. I mean, if that happens, I'm not going to sleep until, after July 1st, 2025, but it would be a hell of an interesting race.
Chris, New Year, I want 3 predictions from you.
3 predictions. Okay, let's start with Eric Adams. I don't think Eric Adams will resign under any circumstance. I just don't see it.
Okay.
Number 2.
But he doesn't resign, and then what? Runs for re-election, and
even if he's convicted at his trial in April, I just don't think he resigns. He's gonna try to appeal it. Maybe he's gonna bank on a Trump pardon. It's just I don't think it's in Eric Adams' DNA to resign from this job. As a second prediction, I do think there is the potential that Republicans could pick up some more ground in, for instance, the city council, with some southern Brooklyn seats. I'm not going to name specific districts, but I do think we have seen kind of a trend in certain outer borough parts of the city where they've been able to capitalize on messaging around crime and around immigration that, whether it's due to a lack of coherent messaging from Democratic candidates or other factors, they've just been able to capitalize on that. So I think we're going to see a continuation of that trend in 2025. A final prediction? I think Richard Torres is absolutely going to run for governor.
That's a good one. Chris, anything I forgot to ask you, anything you want to mention that you want to add to this conversation?
Just that it's going to be a very, very busy 2025 for reporters, for strategists, for politicians in New York City. It's going to be a hectic year.
Best day on the job?
I love busy days. I don't know. So lately, I've had a lot of good...
But any story that you can say, man, that was a night that broke up big. This was a nice...
Something recent. Me and my former colleague at the Daily News, Michael Gartland, who's now at Politico, we first reported that a grand jury was weighing evidence in the Turkey investigation led by the U.S. Attorney's Office. That story became so much more meaningful because at the time, we got so much pushback from City Hall. who claimed that the reporting was wrong and you're so off. This is not at all what's happening. And then, fast forward, and the mayor was indicted. And we know that reporting was right, and we stood by it. And that was, in hindsight, a very meaningful story to break.
Worst day?
I was thinking about this earlier, walking over here. In my current job, right, I get to cover politicians, the people who set the policy for the city, the people who write the laws. There's a lot of difficult days on this beat, but it doesn't compare to the previous reporting roles where I've reported on crime and kind of law enforcement. Because when you're reporting on that, you're seeing, I'm not going to go into graphic details, but you're seeing crime victims, you're speaking to crime victims on their absolute worst days of their lives. You're interviewing people after a relative has died, or you're at a crime scene and you're seeing some pretty awful, grisly things. I think my worst day was some of those days. And again, I don't want to go into exact details because it's very gory, but those days reporting that beat, you see a lot of awful stuff. And I want to give big props to all my colleagues who do that type of work day in and day out, because that's very challenging on your psyche.
Chris, I want to thank you for coming, stopping by and sharing your thoughts on the latest news throughout the city and state. Hopefully this won't be the last time, and I want to wish you and your family a happy holidays.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.